The days that followed my stand were some of the most tense I'd ever experienced in my own home. The air felt thick as if every word spoken was weighed down by resentment and disappointment. David and Jessica moved through the house with a new kind of energy, restless, agitated, and at times openly hostile. Jessica stopped speaking to me altogether. She communicated through sticky notes left on the fridge or terse text messages sent to my phone. Emily's soccer practice is at 4. Please don't use the dryer after 8 p.m. We're having friends over for dinner. Could you stay in your room? Each note was a reminder that I was no longer considered part of the family's daily life, but rather an inconvenience to be managed. David, for his part, seemed to be caught between his wife and his mother, but it was clear where his loyalties now lay. He was short with me, his patience worn thin. If I asked about the kids or tried to make small talk, he would answer in monosyllables or not at all. The warmth that had once defined our relationship was gone, replaced by a cold formality that stung more than any argument ever could. The grandchildren, Emily and Jack, sensed the tension. Emily, always sensitive, started spending more time in her room, her laughter growing less frequent. Jack, who was only 6, clung to me when Jessica wasn't looking, whispering, "Are you mad at Mommy and Daddy?" I hugged him tightly, assuring him that everything was fine, even as my heart broke a little more each day. One evening, after a particularly silent dinner, David knocked on my bedroom door. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, knitting a scarf for Emily, trying to keep my hands busy and my mind calm. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. I set my knitting aside and nodded. "Of course, David." He sat down in the old armchair by the window, the one Tom used to sit in when he read the newspaper. For a moment he looked like the boy I remembered, uncertain, vulnerable, searching for the right words. "Jessica's really upset," he began. "She feels like you're not being fair. She says you're making things harder than they need to be." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "David, I know this isn't easy for any of us, but I've spent my whole life putting everyone else first. I can't do it anymore. I need to take care of myself now." He looked down at his hands, fidgeting with his wedding ring. We need more space, Mom. The kids are growing up. Jessica and I need our own life." I nodded, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. "I understand that. But this is my home. I'm not leaving." He sighed, frustration flickering across his face. "You're not making this easy." I met his gaze, my voice steady. "It's not supposed to be easy, David. It's supposed to be right." He stood up, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what we're going to do." I watched him leave, my heart heavy but my resolve unshaken. I knew this was just the beginning. I could feel the storm gathering, the sense that David and Jessica were planning something bigger, something that would test my strength in ways I hadn't yet imagined. The next morning, the house was filled with a strange, artificial cheerfulness. Jessica was bustling around the kitchen, making pancakes for the kids, her voice a little too bright as she asked Emily about her spelling test and Jack about his favorite cartoon. David sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, barely glancing up as I entered the room. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat quietly, watching the family dynamic unfold as if I were a guest in someone else's home. Jessica didn't offer me any pancakes, and when Jack tried to pass me the syrup, she quickly redirected his attention. I felt invisible, a shadow at the edge of their lives. After breakfast, Jessica announced that she was taking the kids to the park. "We'll be gone most of the day," she said, not looking at me. "David, can you pick up groceries on your way home?" He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. As they left, I heard Emily's small voice. "Can Grandma come too?" Jessica's answer was a sharp, "Not today, honey. Grandma needs to rest." The door closed and the house was silent again. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty plates, feeling the weight of my isolation. I wondered how it had come to this, how I had gone from being the center of my family's world to being an afterthought, a burden, a problem to be solved. I spent the day cleaning, not because it needed to be done but because I needed something to occupy my mind. I scrubbed the floors, dusted the shelves, washed the windows until they sparkled. With every sweep of the mop, I tried to scrub away the hurt, the anger, the sense of betrayal that clung to me like a second skin. In the afternoon, Linda called to check in. Her voice was a lifeline, warm and steady. "How are you holding up?" she asked. I hesitated, not wanting to burden her with my troubles, but she wouldn't let me off the hook. "Margaret, you don't have to pretend with me. Tell me the truth." So I did. I told her about the silent meals, the cold shoulders, the way Jessica was keeping the kids away from me. I told her about the loneliness, the fear that I was losing my family for good. Linda listened, then said, "You're stronger than you think. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. You have every right to be there. And you have people who care about you, don't forget that." Her words gave me comfort, but as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. That evening, after David and Jessica returned with the kids, there was a new tension in the air. Jessica barely spoke to me and David seemed distracted, lost in thought. After the kids went to bed, I heard them talking in their room, their voices low and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were talking about me. The next day, a letter arrived in the mail. It was addressed to me, but the return address was unfamiliar. I opened it with trembling hands and found a brochure for a senior living community, along with a handwritten note from Jessica. "Margaret, we think this would be a good fit for you. It's close by, has great amenities, and you'd have your own space. Please consider it. Jessica." I stared at the brochure, anger and disbelief warring inside me. They were trying to push me out, again. But this time I was ready. I put the brochure in a drawer and went about my day, refusing to let their plans shake my resolve. That evening after dinner, David approached me in the hallway. He looked tired, older than his years, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be. The boy who once ran to me with scraped knees and tearful eyes, needing comfort. But now his eyes were guarded, his voice careful. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked. I nodded, following him into the living room. Jessica was already there, sitting stiffly on the couch, the senior living brochure on the coffee table between us. David cleared his throat. "We know this isn't easy, but we really think this place would be good for you. You'd have your own apartment, activities, people your age. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." Jessica chimed in, her tone rehearsed. "We want you to be happy, Margaret. We want you to have a life of your own. The kids are getting bigger and we need more space." I looked at the two of them, feeling a strange sense of calm. I realized that, for all their talk of my happiness, this was really about their own comfort. They wanted me gone so they could have the house, the space, the life they imagined, without me in it. I picked up the brochure, flipping through the glossy pages. Pictures of smiling seniors playing cards, swimming, gardening. It all looked so pleasant, so easy. But I knew the truth. I knew that no amount of amenities could replace the feeling of home, the sense of belonging I had built over decades. I set the brochure down and met their eyes. "I appreciate your concern," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm not leaving. This is my home. If you want more space, you're welcome to find it somewhere else." Jessica's face hardened. "You're being unreasonable, Margaret. We're just trying to do what's best for everyone." I shook my head. "No, Jessica. You're trying to do what's best for you. And I'm finally doing what's best for me." David looked away, frustration etched in every line of his face. "We can't keep living like this, Mom. Something has to change." I stood up, my hands trembling but my resolve unbroken. "You're right, David. Something does have to change. But it won't be me." I left the room, my heart pounding, but I refused to let them see my fear. I went to my bedroom, closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence settle around me. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't revolve around David and Jessica's approval. I thought about the things I wanted to do, the places I wanted to visit, the friends I wanted to see, the life I wanted to reclaim. I knew the battle wasn't over. I knew they would keep pushing, keep trying to wear me down. But I also knew that I was stronger than I'd ever been. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I whispered a promise to myself. I will not be erased. I will not be pushed aside. I will fight for my place, for my dignity, for my life. The days after the senior living brochure incident were some of the loneliest I'd ever known. The house felt colder, the walls seemed to close in, and the silence between me and David and Jessica grew heavier with every passing hour. I tried to keep busy, baking, gardening, reading, but nothing could distract me from the ache in my chest. I was fighting for my home, but I was fighting alone. One afternoon, as I was watering the roses in the backyard, Linda stopped by. She let herself in through the gate as she'd done for years, carrying a plate of homemade lemon bars and a look of concern. "I thought you could use some company," she said, handing me the plate. I smiled, grateful for her presence. "You have no idea." We sat on the porch, the late afternoon sun warming our faces, and I told her everything. About the brochure, the arguments, the way David and Jessica were trying to push me out. Linda listened, her eyes sharp and sympathetic. "You can't let them bully you, Margaret," she said firmly. "You've given them everything. It's time to stand your ground." I nodded, but the doubt lingered. "It's just so hard, Linda. I feel like I'm losing my family." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're not losing your family. You're finding yourself. And you're not alone. I'm here. And I know others who would stand with you too." Her words gave me a glimmer of hope. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little less alone. That evening, after Linda left, I sat at the kitchen table and made a list of people I could trust. Friends, neighbors, even a few relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. I realized that, while David and Jessica were trying to isolate me, I still had a network of support if I was willing to reach out. The next day I called Susan Miller, the attorney I'd met with before. Her receptionist remembered me and put me through right away. "Margaret, I'm glad you called," Susan said, her voice warm and reassuring. "How are things going?" I told her about the latest developments, about the pressure to move out, about the brochure and the arguments. She listened carefully, then said, "You're doing the right thing by standing your ground. But you don't have to do it alone. If you need legal help, I'm here. And if things get worse, we can take steps to protect your rights." We talked for nearly an hour. Susan explained the legal process for eviction, reassured me that I was within my rights, and encouraged me to keep documenting everything. She also suggested I consider changing the locks if I ever felt threatened, and to let her know immediately if David or Jessica tried to force me out. After I hung up, I felt a new sense of strength. I wasn't powerless. I had options. I had support. That evening, I decided to reach out to my niece, Rachel. She lived a few towns over and we hadn't spoken much since Tom's funeral, but I remembered how close we'd once been. I dialed her number, my hands trembling a little, unsure if she'd even want to hear from me after all this time. To my relief, Rachel answered on the second ring. "Aunt Margaret? Is everything okay?" Her voice was so warm, so genuine that I nearly burst into tears. I steadied myself and told her what had been happening, how David and Jessica were trying to push me out, how alone I felt, how I wasn't sure what to do next. Rachel listened quietly, then said, "Aunt Margaret, you don't deserve this. You've always been there for everyone else. If you need anything at all, you call me. I mean it. I can come visit this weekend if you want." I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. "Thank you, Rachel. I'd love that." We talked for a while longer, reminiscing about old family holidays and the time she'd spent summers at my house as a child. By the time I hung up, I felt lighter, as if a piece of my old self had returned. The next day, I went to the community center for my knitting group. I hadn't told anyone there about my troubles, but as soon as I walked in, my friend Dorothy noticed something was wrong. "Margaret, you look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders," she said, patting the seat next to her. I hesitated, but then the words came tumbling out. I told the group about David and Jessica, about the pressure to move out, about how lost I felt. The women listened, their faces a mix of sympathy and outrage. Dorothy shook her head. "You're not the first one this has happened to, you know. My own daughter tried to get me to sign over my house a few years back. I stood my ground, and you can too." Another woman, Helen, nodded. "My son wanted me to move into a retirement home so he could rent out my place. I told him, over my dead body." The group erupted in laughter, and for the first time in weeks I laughed too. Felt good. No, it felt necessary, to be surrounded by women who understood, who had walked the same path and come out the other side. By the end of the meeting, I had a list of phone numbers, offers of help, and more support than I'd ever expected. "If you need us, we're here," Dorothy said, giving me a hug. "Don't let them bully you, Margaret. You're stronger than you think." I left the community center with my head held high, feeling the warmth of friendship and solidarity. I realized that while my own family might be turning against me, I was building a new family, one made of friends, neighbors, and allies who truly cared. That weekend, Rachel arrived just as she promised. She brought a bouquet of sunflowers and a box of pastries from my favorite bakery. The moment she stepped through the door, the house felt warmer, as if her presence alone could chase away the gloom that had settled over everything. We spent the morning catching up over coffee, sharing stories and laughter that I hadn't realized I'd missed so much. Rachel listened as I told her about the latest arguments, about the silent meals and the way Jessica had started locking her bedroom door at night. She shook her head in disbelief. "I can't believe they're treating you like this," she said. "You've always been the heart of this family. If they can't see that, it's their loss. Her words gave me courage. For the first time, I felt like I had someone in my corner. Someone who would stand up for me if things got worse. That afternoon, Rachel insisted on helping me with a few chores around the house. We cleaned out the attic, sorting through boxes of old photographs and keepsakes. We found Tom's old baseball glove, David's childhood drawings, and a stack of letters I'd written to my sister when I was a young bride. Each item was a reminder of the life I'd built here, of the memories that made this house a home. As we worked, Rachel said, "You know, Aunt Margaret, you don't have to go through this alone. If you ever need a place to stay, my door is always open. And if you want me to talk to David, I will. Sometimes people need to hear the truth from someone else." I hugged her, grateful beyond words. "Thank you, Rachel. Just knowing you're here means everything." That evening, after Rachel left, I sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the trees. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I realized that, while David and Jessica might be trying to push me out, I was not powerless. I had friends, I had family, and I had the strength to stand up for myself. I also knew that the battle wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. But now I was ready. I had support. I had allies. And I had a plan. That night, I called Susan Miller and told her I was ready to take the next step. "Whatever happens," I said, "I'm not backing down." Susan's voice was steady and reassuring. "Good for you, Margaret. I'll be with you every step of the way." As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of determination. I would not let David and Jessica bully me out of my own home. I would fight for my place, for my dignity, for my life. And for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, knowing I was not alone. The days after Rachel's visit were filled with a strange sense of calm before the storm. I went about my routines, watering the garden, baking bread, attending my knitting group, but I could feel the tension in the house building, like thunderclouds gathering on the horizon. David and Jessica were quieter than ever, their conversations behind closed doors growing longer and more urgent. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know what. One Thursday morning, I found a letter slipped under my bedroom door. My heart pounded as I picked it up, recognizing the neat, careful handwriting as Jessica's. "Margaret, we've tried to be patient, but this situation can't go on. We've spoken to a lawyer. If you refuse to move out, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action. Jessica." I sat on the edge of my bed, the letter trembling in my hands. Legal action. The words echoed in my mind, cold and final. For a moment, I felt the old fear creeping in. The fear of being alone, of losing everything I'd worked for, of being cast out by the very people I loved most. But then I remembered Susan Miller's words, Linda's encouragement, Rachel's promise. I remembered the strength I'd found in myself, the support I'd built around me. I took a deep breath, folded the letter, and placed it in my notebook with all the other documentation I'd been keeping. That afternoon, I called Susan. "They're threatening legal action," I said, my voice steady. Susan didn't hesitate. "Don't worry, Margaret. You're prepared. You have every right to stay in your home. If they want to go to court, we'll be ready." We set a meeting for the next day. Susan explained the process. If David and Jessica tried to evict me, they would have to prove in court that I was a danger to myself or others, or that I was violating the law. She reassured me that, as the sole owner of the house, I was well within my rights to stay. That night I barely slept. I lay awake, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house, wondering how it had come to this. I thought about Tom, about the promises we'd made to each other, about the life we'd built together. I wondered what he would say if he could see us now. The next morning, I met Susan at her office. She was calm and professional, her confidence steadying my nerves. We went over my documentation. Every note, every conversation, every incident I'd recorded. Susan assured me that I had a strong case. "If they want to fight, Margaret, we'll give them one," she said, her eyes fierce. I left her office feeling stronger, more determined than ever. I would not let David and Jessica bully me out of my own home. I would stand my ground no matter what. The following week, the tension in the house reached a breaking point. David and Jessica barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was only to remind me of their generosity in letting me stay as long as I had. I could see the strain in David's face, the way he avoided my eyes, the way he snapped at the kids for the smallest things. Jessica, meanwhile, was cold and businesslike, moving through the house as if she were already packing up my life and memories into boxes. One evening after dinner, David asked to speak with me in the living room. Jessica sat beside him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The kids were upstairs, the house unusually quiet. David cleared his throat. Mom, we've given you every chance to do this the easy way. We've tried to be patient, but you're not listening. We've spoken to a lawyer, and if you don't agree to move out, we're going to file for eviction. I looked at my son, searching for any sign of the boy I'd raised. The boy who used to beg for one more bedtime story, who used to bring me wildflowers from the yard. But all I saw was a man who had convinced himself that this was the only way forward. Jessica slid a folder across the coffee table. These are some options for senior communities. We've even toured a few. You'd have your own apartment, activities, everything you need. We'll help you move, but you need to make a decision. I picked up the folder, flipping through the glossy brochures. I saw smiling faces, bright common rooms, lists of amenities. But all I could think about was the life I'd built in this house, the memories in every corner, the years of sacrifice and love. I set the folder down and met their eyes. I appreciate your concern, but I'm not leaving. This is my home. If you want to go to court, I'll see you there. Jessica's face hardened. You're being unreasonable, Margaret. We're just trying to do what's best for everyone. I shook my head. No, Jessica. You're trying to do what's best for you. And I'm finally doing what's best for me. David stood up abruptly, his voice rising. You're tearing this family apart, Mom. Why can't you just make this easy? I stood as well, my voice calm but firm. Because I've spent my whole life making things easy for everyone else. Not anymore. Jessica gathered the folder and stormed out of the room. David lingered for a moment, his shoulders slumped, then followed her upstairs. I sat down on the couch, my heart pounding but my resolve unbroken. The next day I received a formal letter from their lawyer, delivered by certified mail. It was cold and impersonal, outlining their intent to file for eviction if I did not vacate the premises within 30 days. I took the letter to Susan Miller, who read it carefully and smiled. They don't have a case, Margaret. You're the owner. Let them try. We began preparing for court. Susan helped me organize my documentation, coached me on what to expect, and reassured me at every step. Linda and Rachel both offered to testify on my behalf, and several women from my knitting group volunteered to write letters of support. As the court date approached, I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. I was nervous, of course. No one wants to go to court against their own family. But I also felt empowered. I was standing up for myself, for my home, for my right to live with dignity. The night before the hearing, I sat on the porch watching the stars come out one by one. I thought about Tom, about the life we'd built together, about the promises we'd made. I whispered a prayer into the night, asking for strength, for courage, for the wisdom to do what was right. And as I went to bed, I knew that, whatever happened, I would not back down. The morning of the court hearing dawned gray and cold, the kind of day that seemed to press down on your shoulders. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue suit I hadn't worn since Tom's funeral. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a woman who had been through storms before, and survived. Rachel arrived early to drive me to the courthouse. She brought me a thermos of tea and squeezed my hand as we walked up the courthouse steps. You're not alone, Aunt Margaret, she whispered. We're all here for you. Inside, Susan Miller met us with a reassuring smile. She reviewed my notes one last time, then led me into the courtroom. David and Jessica were already there, sitting with their attorney. David looked tired, his face drawn and pale. Jessica's expression was hard, her lips pressed into a thin line. The judge, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, called the case. The lawyers made their opening statements. Jessica's attorney painted a picture of a family in crisis, of adult children forced to live in untenable conditions because their aging mother refused to move on. He spoke of quality of life, privacy, and the best interests of all parties. Susan stood and spoke for me. She told the judge about my decades of ownership, my financial responsibility, my role as the sole provider and caretaker of the home. She presented my documentation. Every bill, every mortgage payment, every note and letter. She spoke of my right to dignity, to security, to remain in the home I had built. Then it was my turn. My hands shook as I took the stand, but I looked the judge in the eye and told my story. I spoke of Tom, of raising David alone, of the sacrifices I'd made. I spoke of the joy I'd felt watching my grandchildren grow, and the pain of being made to feel like a burden. I told the truth simply and plainly. This is my home. I have nowhere else to go. I deserve to stay. Rachel and Linda both testified, describing my character, my kindness, and the love I'd shown my family and community. Members of my knitting group submitted letters, describing how I'd helped them through hard times, how I'd always put others first. David was called to the stand. He looked at the floor as he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We just wanted our own space. We thought Mom would be happier somewhere else. We didn't mean to hurt her. Jessica, when asked, insisted she was only thinking of the children, that she wanted what was best for everyone. But her words rang hollow, and even the judge seemed to sense it. After closing arguments, the judge called a recess. I sat in the hallway, my heart pounding, Rachel's arm around my shoulders. Susan squeezed my hand. You did great, Margaret. No matter what happens, you stood up for yourself. When the judge returned, she spoke directly to David and Jessica. It is clear to this court that Margaret is the rightful owner of her home. There is no legal or moral basis for her eviction. Family is not always easy, but respect for those who built our lives is the foundation of any home. The petition for eviction is denied. I felt the breath rush from my lungs. Tears filled my eyes as Rachel hugged me, as Linda squeezed my hand, as Susan smiled with relief. David and Jessica left the courtroom without a word. I watched them go, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. I knew things would never be the same between us, but I also knew I had done what I needed to do. That night I sat on my porch watching the stars. For the first time in months I felt truly at peace. I had fought for my home, for my dignity, for my life, and I had won. The morning after the court hearing, I woke up before dawn, sunlight just beginning to filter through the curtains. For a moment I lay in bed listening to the quiet of the house. It was the same house I'd lived in for decades, but it felt different now, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from the very walls. I sat up slowly, letting the events of the previous day wash over me. The judge's words echoed in my mind. There is no legal or moral basis for her eviction. The petition is denied. I had won. I had stood up for myself, for my home, for my dignity, and I had won. But victory, I realized, was not just about winning in court. It was about reclaiming my sense of self, about finding peace in the aftermath of a storm that had threatened to tear my life apart. I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. The house was quiet. David and Jessica had left early, taking the kids with them. I didn't know if they would come back or if they would try to make things work, but for now I was alone. And for the first time in a long time I was grateful for the solitude. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sun rise over the backyard. The garden was in full bloom, the roses and lilies glowing in the morning light. I thought about all the years I'd spent tending that garden, about the hours I'd spent planting, weeding, watering, coaxing life from the soil. It was a labor of love, a testament to my resilience, my patience, my hope. As I sipped my coffee, I allowed myself to remember the hard times, the nights I'd lain awake worrying about money, about David, about the future. I remembered the loneliness, the fear, the sense of being invisible in my own home. But I also remembered the moments of joy, the laughter of my grandchildren, the warmth of Linda's friendship, the comfort of Rachel's support. I realized that victory was not just about what I had gained, but about what I had learned. I had learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive heartbreak and betrayal, that I could build a new life from the ashes of the old. After breakfast, I called Linda to share the news. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright with anticipation. Well, how did it go? She asked. I smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. We won, Linda. The judge ruled in my favor. I get to stay in my home. There was a pause, then a whoop of joy. Oh, Margaret. I knew you could do it. I'm so proud of you. We talked for a while, sharing laughter and relief. Linda promised to come by later with a bottle of wine to celebrate. As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of gratitude. For Linda, for Rachel, for Susan Miller, for everyone who had stood by me when I needed them most. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning the house, not out of obligation, but out of a desire to reclaim my space. I opened the windows, letting in the fresh spring air. I dusted the shelves, swept the floors, and arranged fresh flowers in a vase on the kitchen table. With every task, I felt a little more like myself. A woman who had survived, who had fought, who had won. After lunch, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. The air was crisp and clean, the sky a brilliant blue. As I strolled down the sidewalk, I passed familiar houses and gardens, each one holding memories of block parties, summer barbecues, and quiet evenings spent chatting with neighbors on their porches. Mrs. Parker was out front, trimming her hydrangeas. She looked up as I approached, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Margaret, I heard the news from Linda. Congratulations, dear. You must feel so relieved." I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Parker. I do. It's been a long road, but I finally feel like I can breathe again." She patted my arm. "You're an inspiration to all of us. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." We talked for a few minutes about the garden, about the weather, about the changes in the neighborhood. As I continued my walk, I felt a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in months. These people had watched me raise David, had brought casseroles when Tom died, had cheered for Emily and Jack at the school talent show. They were my community, my extended family. When I returned home, I found a note on the kitchen counter. It was from Jessica, written in her neat, careful handwriting. "Margaret, we're going to stay with Jessica's parents for a while. We need some time to figure things out. Please don't contact us for now. We'll be in touch about the kids. David." I read the note twice, my emotions a tangled knot of relief, sadness, and uncertainty. Part of me was glad for the peace and quiet, for the chance to reclaim my home without the constant tension. But another part of me mourned the loss of my family, the empty rooms, the absence of laughter and chaos. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the note and let myself grieve. I cried for the years I'd spent building a life for David, for the sacrifices I'd made, for the love that had been taken for granted. I cried for the grandchildren I might not see for a while, for the holidays that would be quieter, for the dreams that had been shattered. But as the tears dried, I felt something else. A sense of freedom, of possibility. For the first time in decades, my life was my own. I could go where I wanted, do what I pleased, make decisions without fear of judgment or rejection. That evening, Linda arrived with a bottle of wine and a box of chocolates. We sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the trees, sipping wine and sharing stories. Linda toasted to my victory, to my courage, to the new chapter ahead. "To Margaret," she said, raising her glass. "A woman who knows her worth." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "To friendship," I replied. "And to second chances." As the sky darkened and the stars came out, I realized that victory was not just about winning a battle. It was about reclaiming my life, my joy, my sense of self. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds singing outside my window. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the tense silence that had haunted these rooms for so long. I made myself a hearty breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh orange juice, and ate at the kitchen table with the newspaper spread out before me. For the first time in years, I read every article, did the crossword, and lingered over my coffee, savoring the simple pleasure of a morning that belonged entirely to me. After breakfast, I wandered through the house, taking stock of the space that was now truly mine. I opened the doors to the guest room and the kids' old playroom, letting in the sunlight and fresh air. I dusted the shelves, rearranged the furniture, and started making plans for how I might use the rooms. Maybe I'd turn the playroom into a craft studio, or the guest room into a cozy reading nook. The possibilities felt endless. I spent the afternoon in the garden, pulling weeds and planting new flowers. The work was hard, but it was satisfying. With every shovelful of earth, I felt myself growing stronger, more rooted in this place I called home. I thought about Tom, about how he used to tease me for talking to the plants. "You're the only person I know who can make a rosebush blush," he'd say, his eyes twinkling with affection. As I worked, I found myself humming an old song, the melody drifting on the breeze. I remembered singing that song to David when he was a boy, rocking him to sleep in the old armchair by the window. I wondered if he remembered those nights, if he ever thought about the mother who had loved him so fiercely, so completely. Later, I took a break and sat on the porch with a glass of lemonade. I watched the world go by, the mailman making his rounds, children riding their bikes, neighbors walking their dogs. I felt a sense of connection to this community, to the rhythms of daily life that had continued even as my own world had been turned upside down. In the evening, I called Rachel to share the news. She was overjoyed, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Aunt Margaret, I'm so proud of you. You did it. You really did it." We talked for a long time, making plans for her next visit. She promised to bring the kids, to fill the house with laughter and love. I felt a surge of hope, A sense that while some doors had closed, others were opening. That night I sat in the living room, surrounded by the quiet comfort of my home. I lit a candle and placed it on the mantel, a small beacon of light in the darkness. I thought about the journey I'd been on, the pain, the struggle, the moments of doubt and fear. I thought about the people who had stood by me, who had lifted me up when I was at my lowest. And I thought about the future, the adventures yet to come, the friendships yet to be made, the life yet to be lived. As I blew out the candle and climbed into bed, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. For my home. For my freedom. For the victory I had claimed not just in court but in my own heart. The days that followed settled into a gentle, healing rhythm. I found myself rediscovering old joys and exploring new ones. I joined a book club at the local library where I met women who, like me, had stories of loss and resilience. We shared laughter over coffee, swapped recipes, and debated the endings of our favorite novels. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere outside the boundaries of my family. I also started volunteering at the community center, helping with the after-school program for neighborhood kids. The children's energy was infectious, their curiosity and kindness a balm to my soul. They reminded me of Emily and Jack, and though I missed my grandchildren fiercely, I found comfort in the smiles and hugs of these new little friends. One afternoon, as I was helping a group of kids with their homework, Dorothy from my knitting group stopped by. She handed me a basket filled with homemade bread and a note that read, "For Margaret, who reminds us all to be brave." I hugged her, tears springing to my eyes. The support of these women, their unwavering belief in me, had become a lifeline. At home, I continued to make small changes. I painted the guest room a cheerful yellow, hung new curtains in the kitchen, and rearranged the living room furniture to suit my own tastes. I filled the house with fresh flowers, their colors and scents a daily reminder that life could be beautiful again. I also took time to rest, to sit quietly with a cup of tea and watch the world outside my window. I allowed myself to grieve the losses. The family dinners that would never be the same, the birthdays and holidays that might be quieter now. But I also celebrated the gains. The peace, the autonomy, the sense of self I had reclaimed. One evening as I was reading on the porch, I heard footsteps on the walkway. I looked up to see Linda approaching, a smile on her face and a bottle of sparkling cider in her hand. "I thought we should celebrate again," she said, settling into the chair beside me. We toasted to new beginnings, to friendship, to the courage it takes to stand up for oneself. As the sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, I felt a profound sense of contentment. I had weathered the storm and I was still standing. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking about David and Jessica. I wondered where they were, if they were happy, if they regretted the choices they had made. I missed the children, missed the sound of their laughter echoing through the halls. But I knew that I could not control their actions, only my own. I wrote a letter to Emily and Jack, telling them how much I loved them, how proud I was of them, and how I hoped to see them soon. I tucked the letters away, unsure if I would ever send them, but comforted by the act of putting my feelings into words. As I turned out the lights and climbed into bed, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had fought for my home, for my dignity, for my life, and I had won. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time I was not afraid. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakably David's. Careful, a little shaky, as if he'd rewritten it several times before sending. My heart pounded as I opened the envelope, unsure what to expect. Inside, the letter was brief but sincere. "I know things have been hard. I'm sorry for the pain we caused you. I don't know if we can fix everything, but I want you to know I'm grateful for all you've done. The kids miss you. Maybe when things settle down we can talk. Love, David." I read the letter twice, tears blurring the words. It wasn't a full apology, not yet, but it was a start, a crack in the wall that had grown between us. I folded the letter and placed it in my keepsake box, alongside Tom's old watch and the baby shoes David had worn on his first birthday. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. I thought about the journey I'd taken, the heartbreak, the loneliness, the moments when I doubted my own worth. I thought about the friends who had lifted me up, the community that had embraced me, the strength I'd found within myself. I realized that victory wasn't just about keeping my house. It was about reclaiming my voice, my independence, my right to be seen and heard. It was about learning that love doesn't mean surrendering your dignity, that family doesn't give anyone the right to erase you. As the stars appeared one by one, I whispered a quiet thank you. To Tom, to Linda, to Rachel, to everyone who had helped me remember who I was. I promised myself that I would keep living, keep loving, keep fighting for the life I deserved. And I knew deep in my bones that whatever the future held, I would face it with courage and grace. The weeks after the court victory passed in a gentle, almost dreamlike haze. For the first time in years, I felt the world open up before me, wide and full of possibility. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the tense, suffocating silence that had haunted me for so long. I found myself waking up each morning with a sense of anticipation, wondering what the day might bring. I started each day with a walk around the neighborhood, breathing in the fresh air, greeting neighbors and watching the seasons change. The trees were just beginning to bud, their branches tipped with the promise of new life. I noticed things I hadn't seen in years. The way the sunlight filtered through the leaves, the sound of bird song, the laughter of children playing down the street. It was as if the world itself was reminding me that life goes on, that beauty can be found even after the hardest winters. I threw myself into my garden, determined to bring it back to life. I spent hours digging, planting, and weeding, my hands caked with earth and my heart lighter with every new bloom. The roses flourished, the lilies stretched toward the sun, and the old lilac bush by the fence burst into fragrant purple blossoms. Neighbors stopped by to admire the transformation, and I found myself sharing cuttings and gardening tips, building new connections with people I'd only ever waved to before. Inside the house, I continued to make changes. I painted the hallway a soft blue, hung new artwork in the living room, and finally replaced the old, threadbare curtains in the dining room with bright, cheerful ones. Each change felt like a small act of reclamation, a way of stamping my identity on the space that was truly mine. I also began to explore the world beyond my front door. I signed up for a painting class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time or confidence for. The first day I was nervous, convinced I'd be the oldest and least talented person in the room. But the instructor, a kind woman named Marcia, welcomed me with open arms, and the other students, men and women of all ages, quickly became friends. We laughed over our mistakes, celebrated our small victories, and encouraged each other to keep going. I discovered a joy in creating, in losing myself in color and form, in expressing feelings I hadn't known how to put into words. I brought home my first finished painting, a simple landscape of the garden outside my window, and hung it proudly in the hallway. Volunteering at the community center became another source of fulfillment. I helped organize a spring fair, baked cookies for a fundraiser, and even gave a talk to a group of young mothers about resilience and self-care. Sharing my story was hard at first, but I saw the way the women listened, the way their eyes filled with understanding and hope. I realized that my pain, my struggle, could be a source of strength for others. Through it all, Linda remained my steadfast companion. We met for coffee, went to the movies, and took day trips to nearby towns. Sometimes we talked about the past, about Tom and the early days of motherhood, about the pain of losing family. But more often we talked about the future, about travel plans, new hobbies, and the adventures we still wanted to have. One Saturday morning, I received a call from Rachel. Her voice was bright, full of excitement. "Aunt Margaret, I have some news. I got the promotion I was hoping for, and I want to celebrate with you. How about dinner at that Italian place you love?" I smiled, feeling a surge of pride for my niece. "That sounds wonderful, Rachel. I'd love to." That evening, as we sat in the cozy restaurant sipping wine and sharing stories, I realized how much my world had changed. Rachel talked about her new job, her plans to travel, and the friends she'd made in her new city. She asked about my painting class, about the garden, about the book club I'd joined. For the first time in a long time, I felt like an equal, not just someone's mother or aunt, but a woman with her own life, her own dreams. After dinner, we walked along the river, the city lights reflecting on the water. Rachel slipped her arm through mine. "I'm so proud of you, Aunt Margaret. You've been through so much, but you never gave up. You inspire me." Her words warmed me more than the wine. I squeezed her hand, grateful for the bond we shared. "Thank you, Rachel. I'm proud of you too. You remind me that it's never too late to start over." As the weeks passed, I heard bits and pieces about David and Jessica. Through neighbors and mutual friends, I learned that they were struggling. The house they'd moved into with Jessica's parents was cramped, and the adjustment hadn't been easy. Jessica's mother was set in her ways, And David found himself on the receiving end of the same criticisms and coldness that Jessica had once directed at me. I felt a complicated mix of emotions: sadness, relief, and, if I was honest, a touch of vindication. It wasn't that I wished them harm, but there was a certain justice in seeing them face the consequences of their choices. Karma, I realized, has a way of coming full circle. One afternoon, as I was tending the roses, Mrs. Parker stopped by with a casserole. "I thought you could use a little company," she said, settling onto the porch swing beside me. We talked about the neighborhood, about her grandchildren, about the changes we'd both seen over the years. She listened as I shared my worries about David and Jessica, about the distance that had grown between us. "You did the right thing, Margaret," she said gently. "You stood up for yourself. Sometimes people need to learn the hard way. Maybe this will help them see things differently." I nodded, hoping she was right. I missed my grandchildren, missed the sound of their laughter, the warmth of their hugs. But I knew that I couldn't go back to the way things were. I had found a new strength, a new sense of self, and I wasn't willing to give that up. Not for anyone. That night, I wrote another letter to Emily and Jack. I told them about the garden, about the painting I'd finished, about the new friends I'd made. I told them how much I loved them, how proud I was of them, and how I hoped we could see each other soon. I sealed the letters and placed them in a drawer, waiting for the right moment to send them. As spring turned to summer, my world continued to expand. I took a weekend trip with Linda to the coast, something we'd talked about for years but never managed to do. We walked along the beach, collecting seashells and letting the cold Atlantic water lap at our ankles. We ate lobster rolls at a little shack by the pier and watched the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. For the first time in decades, I felt truly free. Free from obligation, free from guilt, free to simply enjoy the moment. On the drive home, Linda turned to me and said, "You know, Margaret, I think you're happier now than I've ever seen you." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words. "I think I am, Linda. I really think I am." Back at home, I continued to nurture the life I was building. I started a small vegetable patch in the backyard, growing tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers. I invited neighbors over for tea and homemade pie, filling the house with laughter and conversation. I even hosted a book club meeting, something I never would have had the confidence to do before. The women from my knitting group became regular visitors, bringing their projects and their stories. We spent long afternoons on the porch, knitting and talking, sharing advice and encouragement. They became my chosen family, a circle of support that reminded me I was never truly alone. One afternoon, as we sat together in the shade, Dorothy shared her own story of standing up to her children. "They thought they knew what was best for me," she said, her needles clicking steadily. "But I knew my own heart. I'm glad you listened to yours, Margaret." Helen nodded in agreement. We're not just mothers and grandmothers. We're women with our own lives, our own dreams. It's about time the world remembered that. Their words echoed in my mind long after they left. I realized that my journey wasn't just about reclaiming my home. It was about reclaiming my identity, my autonomy, my right to live on my own terms. As the days grew longer and the garden flourished, I found myself looking forward to each new day. I made plans to visit Rachel in her new city, to take a painting workshop in the fall, to volunteer at the animal shelter. My calendar, once empty and colorless, was now filled with activities and adventures. But even as I embraced my new life, there were moments of sadness, moments when I missed David and the grandchildren with an ache that never quite went away. I wondered if they thought of me, if they missed me, if they regretted the choices they had made. One evening, as I was watering the garden, I saw a familiar car pull up in front of the house. My heart leapt into my throat as I watched David step out, looking uncertain and a little older than I remembered. He stood at the edge of the yard, hands in his pockets, staring at the house as if seeing it for the first time. I set down the watering can and walked to the gate, my heart pounding. For a moment we just looked at each other, the silence heavy with all the things left unsaid. "Hi, Mom," he said finally, his voice soft. "Hi, David," I replied, my own voice trembling. He hesitated, then said, "Can we talk?" We sat together on the porch, the evening air warm and fragrant with the scent of blooming roses. For a long moment neither of us spoke. I could see the struggle in David's eyes, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. Finally he broke the silence. "I owe you an apology, Mom. For everything. For the way we treated you, for trying to force you out of your own home. I thought I was doing what was best for my family, but I see now how wrong I was." I listened, my heart aching with a mix of relief and sorrow. Thank you, David. That means a lot to me. I never wanted things to end up like this. I just wanted to be respected, to be part of your lives. He nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I know. I let Jessica's frustration become my own. I let her convince me that you were the problem when really we were just overwhelmed. Living with her parents hasn't been easy. I understand now what it feels like to be the outsider, to feel like you don't belong. I reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently. I'm sorry it took all this for you to see it, but I'm glad you do. I love you, David. I always have and I always will. He looked away, wiping his eyes. The kids miss you. Emily asks about you every day. Jack keeps your picture by his bed. A lump formed in my throat. I miss them too. More than I can say. We sat in silence for a while, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. Finally, David spoke again. I don't know if things can ever go back to the way they were, but I'd like to try. I want you to be part of our lives again. I want the kids to know their grandmother. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but they were tears of hope, not pain. I'd like that too. But things have to be different this time. I need to be respected. I need to have my own space, my own life. He nodded. I understand. I promise things will be different. We talked for a while longer, sharing memories, making tentative plans for a visit with the kids. When David left, I watched him drive away, my heart lighter than it had been in months. I knew there was still work to be done, still wounds to heal, but for the first time I believed that reconciliation was possible. That night, I wrote in my journal, reflecting on everything that had happened. I realized that karma wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about learning, about growth, about the chance to make things right. I had found freedom not just from the past, but from the fear that had held me captive for so long. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had fought for my home, for my dignity, for my life, and I had won. But the greatest victory was the freedom to choose my own path, to live on my own terms, to forgive and be forgiven. The next week I received a card in the mail. It was from Emily and Jack, covered in crayon hearts and stick figures. Inside, Emily had written, "We love you, Grandma. Can we come see your garden soon?" Jack had drawn a picture of the two of us holding hands, surrounded by flowers. I pressed the card to my heart, tears of joy streaming down my face. I called Rachel and told her the news, and she insisted on coming over to celebrate. We baked cookies, laughed until our sides hurt, and made plans for a family picnic in the backyard. A new tradition, one that belonged to me. As summer deepened, my home became a gathering place again. Rachel visited often, bringing friends and stories from her new job. Linda and the knitting group came by for porch afternoons, their laughter filling the air. Even Mrs. Parker stopped in with fresh tomatoes from her garden, and we sat together, reminiscing about the old days and dreaming about the future. One Saturday, David brought Emily and Jack for a visit. The children ran through the house, their voices echoing in the halls, their joy infectious. We picked flowers in the garden, baked cookies in the kitchen, and read stories on the porch swing. For the first time in a long time, the house felt alive, filled with love and hope. David and I talked quietly while the kids played. He apologized again, more deeply this time, and I could see the sincerity in his eyes. I know I can't undo the past, Mom, but I want to do better. I want the kids to know what family really means. I smiled, squeezing his hand. We all make mistakes, David. What matters is that we learn from them. I'm proud of you for coming back. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and lavender, I realized how far I had come. I had faced betrayal, loneliness, and fear. I had fought for my home, my dignity, and my freedom. And in the end, I had found not just victory but peace. Karma, I realized, isn't about punishment. It's about balance. It's about finding your way back to yourself, about letting go of anger and embracing forgiveness. It's about building a life that is truly your own, surrounded by people who love and respect you. That night, as I sat on the porch with Emily curled up beside me and Jack chasing fireflies in the yard, I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe. For second chances. For new beginnings. For the freedom to live, to love, and to be myself. The summer days grew long and golden, and I found myself savoring each one as if it were a precious gift. My home, once a battleground of tension and heartbreak, had become a sanctuary again. A place of laughter, warmth, and peace. The garden bloomed in wild profusion, The kitchen was filled with the scent of fresh bread and cookies, and the porch echoed with the voices of friends and family. I spent my mornings in quiet reflection, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sunlight dance across the floor. Sometimes I would write in my journal, recording the small victories and moments of gratitude that filled my days. Other times I would simply sit and listen, to the birds, to the wind in the trees, to the gentle hum of life moving forward. As the weeks passed, I found myself thinking more and more about the journey I had taken. I remembered the fear and uncertainty, the nights spent lying awake, wondering if I had made the right choice. I remembered the pain of David's words, the loneliness of being pushed aside, the ache of missing my grandchildren. But I also remembered the strength I had found, the courage to say no, the determination to fight for my place in the world. I realized that my story was not just about loss and betrayal. It was about resilience, about the power of standing up for yourself, about the importance of self-respect. It was about learning that love does not mean surrendering your dignity, that family does not give anyone the right to erase you. One afternoon as I was weeding the garden, Emily came running up to me, her hair flying in the breeze. "Grandma, look. I found a ladybug." She held out her hand, her eyes shining with excitement. I knelt beside her, marveling at the tiny creature crawling across her palm. "That's good luck, you know," I said, smiling. She grinned. "Can we keep it?" I shook my head. "Ladybugs belong in the garden, sweetheart. They help the flowers grow." She nodded, carefully setting the ladybug on a rose petal. "I want to help things grow too." Her words stayed with me long after she ran off to play. I thought about all the ways I had helped things grow. My family, my friendships, my own sense of self. I thought about the seeds I had planted, the roots I had nurtured, the blooms that had finally, after so much struggle, burst into color. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of lavender, I sat on the porch with Linda and Rachel, sipping iced tea and watching the fireflies dance. We talked about the future. About trips we wanted to take, books we wanted to read, dreams we still hoped to chase. Linda raised her glass in a toast. "To Margaret," she said, her voice full of affection. "To new beginnings, to old friends, and to the courage it takes to start over." Rachel smiled, her eyes shining. "To family, the one you're born with and the one you choose." I felt a surge of gratitude, a sense of contentment that filled me from head to toe. I realized that while my journey had been hard, it had also been beautiful. I had learned to let go of what no longer served me, to embrace what brought me joy, to trust in my own strength. As the days slipped into autumn, I found myself reflecting on the lessons life had taught me. I realized that the hardest part of my journey wasn't the legal battle or the loneliness. It was learning to value myself, to believe that I was worthy of love and respect, no matter what anyone else said. I began to see my story in the faces of others. At the community center, I met women who had been through their own storms: divorce, loss, betrayal, the slow erosion of self-worth that comes from years of putting others first. We shared our stories over cups of coffee and knitting needles, finding comfort in the knowledge that we were not alone. One afternoon, I was asked to speak at a support group for women facing family conflict. I was nervous, unsure if my story would matter to anyone else. But as I stood before the group, I saw the hope and pain in their eyes, and I knew that my words could make a difference. I told them about the day David called me a burden, about the fear and heartbreak that followed, about the long, slow climb back to myself. I told them about the friends who stood by me, the lawyer who fought for me, the family I found in unexpected places. I told them about the moment I realized that saying no was not an act of selfishness, but an act of survival. Afterwards, several women came up to thank me. One, a young mother with tears in her eyes, hugged me tightly. "You gave me hope," she whispered. "I thought I was alone." I hugged her back, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in my heart. I realized that my story was not just my own. It was the story of every woman who has ever been told she is too much, too old, too inconvenient. It was the story of every person who has ever had to fight for their place in the world. At home, I continued to nurture the life I had built. I painted more, filling the walls with color and light. I hosted dinners for friends, filling the house with laughter and music. I spent time with Emily and Jack, teaching them how to bake bread, how to plant seeds, how to find joy in the simple things. David visited more often, sometimes bringing Jessica, who was quieter now, more thoughtful. Our conversations were tentative at first, but slowly the walls began to come down. We talked about the past, about the mistakes we had made, about the ways we could do better. I forgave them not because they had asked for it but because I needed to let go of the pain. One evening as we sat together on the porch, David turned to me and said, "Thank you, Mom. For everything. For not giving up on us. For teaching us what it means to be strong." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "We're all learning, David. That's what life is for." As the leaves turned gold and crimson, I felt a sense of closure, a sense that the wounds of the past were finally healing. I knew there would be hard days ahead. Days when the loneliness crept back in, when the memories hurt more than they healed. But I also knew that I was not the same woman I had been. I was stronger, wiser, more compassionate. I had learned that freedom is not just the absence of chains, but the presence of possibility. I had learned that love is not just about giving but about receiving, about allowing yourself to be seen and valued. I had learned that family is not just about blood, but about the people who stand by you when the world turns cold. As winter approached, I found myself looking forward to the holidays with a new sense of hope. I decorated the house with twinkling lights and garlands, baked gingerbread cookies with Emily and Jack, and invited friends and neighbors for a potluck dinner. The house was filled with warmth and laughter, the air alive with the scent of cinnamon and pine. On Christmas Eve, as we gathered around the table, I looked at the faces of those I loved. David and Jessica, Rachel, Linda, the grandchildren, and friends who had become family. I realized that, despite everything, my heart was full. I had lost much, but I had gained even more. After dinner, as the children played by the fire and the adults sipped coffee, I stood to make a toast. My hands trembled a little, but my voice was strong. "I want to thank all of you for being here, for standing by me, for reminding me that life is worth fighting for. I've learned that we are never too old to start over, never too broken to heal, never too lost to be found. I hope my story reminds you that you are worthy of love, of respect, of happiness, no matter what anyone else says." There were tears in many eyes as I sat down, and I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I knew that my journey was far from over, that there would be new challenges, new joys, new lessons to learn. But I also knew that I was ready for whatever came next. That night as I lay in bed, I thought about the message I wanted to leave behind, not just for my family but for anyone who might hear my story. To anyone listening, if you ever find yourself feeling invisible, unappreciated, or unwanted, please remember, you are not alone. You are not a burden. You are not powerless. You have the right to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, to create a life that brings you joy. It's never too late to choose yourself. If my story touched your heart, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. Please subscribe to my channel, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let me know, what would you do if you were in my place? Your stories matter too. Thank you for being part of my journey. Thank you for reminding me that even in the darkest times, there is always hope. With love, Margaret.